Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Flourish. I'm excited because we're continuing our dialogues that we've been having in God's heart for the generations. And I'm also excited because I've got my friend and one of the elders here at Fellowship, Jordan Dillon, with me today. What's up, Jordan?
Hey Geoff, how's it going?
It's good. We were just kind of chatting before we jumped on here about parenting and the busyness of parenting in the season, kind of as school ends and summer's starting to begin. And that's something that we kind of share in our generation. And so we've kind of been working our way up over the past several weeks, generation by generation. And now we're kind of in this mid-30s to kind of mid-40s generation, and people call us the millennials, and sometimes there's some bad rap that the millennials have gotten in years past, and from kind of our upper millennial age, and but there's some unique things that I believe that the Lord is doing in our specific generation and some generational perspective that we can give as well. So I'm excited to dive in because as we've talked about, if you've been with us, is God has a heart for the generations.
That's right.
And His word sustains throughout the generations. And there's a role that each of us have to play in what the Lord is doing here among His people and here in this earth and in this particular season. And so it's been great to dive in, Jordan, and kind of talk through this with a couple other folks. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you. And I kind of want to start our dialogue focused on our generational perspective, or more so your generational perspective, and how important it is in your mind for intergenerational connection and discipleship across the generations.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. So I think it is really important, and I think one of the things the intergenerational community gives us, it just gives us perspective that's different. A lot of our generations, they have different trends or cultural kind of distinctives, but sometimes what we can lack then is the perspective on how to understand those things. So talking with people from other generations about what was happening in their generation, I think brings us more perspective at times.
Yeah.
And perspective is something we can't always get on our own. We need other people to help us with.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think, one of the reasons it's important for intergenerational dialogue and community, especially in the church.
Yeah, I love that. I always think about just my own human nature to go, don't tell me like how to do this thing, or how to raise my kids, or the decisions that I should make because I'm grown now. That's me saying like I'm not a child anymore. I'm almost 40. I can do, and it's just easy to kind of focus on self and think I can do this on my own. But there is so much things that we can glean from as we get perspective from other generations, not only older, but those younger than us now as well.
Absolutely. And, it helps us too, I think, even in struggles and trials. It's easy for us to think, the sky is falling, the world is closing in on us. Right. But when we look back and say, oh, my grandfather lived during the Great Depression era, and through other world crises. And so it helps us, I think, then see that God is still at work, even in hugely challenging times, especially when we can say, oh, God sustained them or God brought them through. He'll do the same for us. I think that helps us, especially in trials. But I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And so you talked a little bit about like, my grandfather, like he, and talking about personal story and how maybe we've been impacted positively by generational connection. How about you? Like, is there a story or a thought or two you can think of as just like my life is better or changed or has been positively impacted by intergenerational connection?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess one story or one kind of experience I had that comes to mind for me is really at college, right? So some of my closest professors in college were people from a different generation, and so they didn't just teach me ideas and content and information. They also taught from their experiences, and so a couple specifically that I still have a relationship with, and we still get together a couple times a year. Wow. But we formed those relationships, at that time, and I really just valued them not just as professors and teachers, but they've also become friends of mine. mine that I still look to and respect, and for their wisdom and guidance, but also just as friends encouraging me on my journey through life. And so I know those people have been really important for me at that time, but also continuing. It started then and it's kind of continued forward. So those are a couple people that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, I love that.
How about you?
Yeah, I think for me, man, I can go back to a college professor, you know which one too. Terry Linhart's his name, and Jordan works with Terry for Bethel University, and he was just really influential when I was 19 or 20 because he was down to earth, and there were some things about his life that he allowed us to see that opened my eyes to like, oh, you can be smart and a go-getter, but also down to earth. And there were some things that he would allow for some of us in the ministry program to know about his journey, and his wife and his children. I'm like, oh, this dude was working at a factory at one point in his life around my age, waiting for the Lord to open up doors to what his heart desired, and where he is now. I think about that, saying, oh, I remember that story. And he said, man, I worked at that factory one summer. And I'm like, but you're a professor, so you worked at a factory. So then at that age, you go, man, there is purpose for life, and there's progress and stages in parts of your life. So I think about that. I think about even now in our context at Fellowship, being involved and help overseeing our prayer ministries. Some of the most influential people in my life right now in regards to prayer are men and some women that are 60, 65, 70, and just their years of praying fervently, and even the ways they've invited other people to join them in with prayer, or even just listening to them pray. It's like, man, this is super influential in my life. And I've told them, say, no, you're doing that for us. And I'm saying, yeah, but you're doing it for me. You're making huge impacts in my ministry, more than you would ever know. And so those are just a couple. Yeah,
that's good. What do you think it takes to let people influence you who are from other generations? Like, what has to be in you to receive kind of that benefit or that influence?
Yeah, for me, I always think that we have to have the sense of humility, which is, it's a trigger word, everybody's a buzzword, but it's that true sense of laying self down, not seeing myself so high or high above others, and go, Lord, you're continuing a work in me. You're constantly at work in me. And since we were talking about this with some ministry staffers this week, is because we are gospel partners, and the Lord's word says that in Philippians 1:3, we're partners in the gospel, and you're finishing a work in me, verse 6, like, I gotta be humble enough to go, where are gospel partners? Where are they around me that they might have influence in my life, if that makes sense? And so I got to go, Lord, you're doing a work in me. I'm partnering with people in the gospel that might not be like me, the same age as me, the same generation as me. Where can I humble myself so that you can continue to do the work in me? Because you just might be putting things in them, or are already given them gifts and talents and wisdom and oversight that I don't have. And can I humble myself to receive it? I don't want to go into situations with a heart that is too proud to receive, just because I'm deemed as a leader in someone else's eyes and opinion.
Absolutely, and I think too, one thing I hear at Fellowship, but also in other places in my life, is God moving people from different generations into each other's lives at the right times. Then, like you said, to be humble enough to ask the question, why maybe has God put them in my life now, and how do I grow and learn as a disciple and a husband or a father or whatever from these people God's put there. And so, I think recognizing that, but then bringing that humble approach, it's for our benefit in gospel partnership.
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking, Jordan, as you were just sharing, our lives cross in places because of the Lord's work in doing that. I think a little bit about how, at least from my perspective, our generation loves to be heard. We're the cause generation, and so we like to be heard and say everything, and the power of pausing and listening. So Brent Allen. Do you know Brent Allen?
Yeah.
So Brent Allen is a pastor at one of the churches in our denomination, and so he 40 years of ministry experience, and he called me during the pandemic and said, "How Brent's 30 years older than me about," and so he said, "Hey, I just want to connect. How comfortable are you with maybe meeting at distance and doing it?" And we did, and he just wanted to know about me. And I was like, this is really interesting. What would this dude want to know about my little baby ministry time, working in the church compared to his? And as I talked, something inside of me said, be quiet. Be quiet and ask him about his experiences. And so that would be one of the things that I would even tell our generation is as we start to have that yearning to be connected with those from different generations, to actually go, shh. As they ask us about our needs and what we desire, can we go like the Lord prompted me to do and say, hey, Brent, can you tell me a little bit more about your experiences and how the Lord's been shaping your life and you just everything like that. That's big.
Yeah, no, I love that. I have a similar thing with a guy who's actually one of my dad's friends. So he's one of my dad's peers, but he's kind of become a bit of a mentor to me over this last year. And we Zoom about once a month with no strong agenda. And last month we talked and I said, hey, tell me your story, like through different kind of stages of your faith development. And he talked about some things like I had no idea, like he was in the Navy and I didn't know that. And he talked about how much that shaped his like cross-cultural experiences and relationships, and then just kind of moving through his life and living in different parts of the country. But hearing his story was really helpful and encouraging for me in ways that he probably didn't know. But like you said, it just came because I got to listen for a few minutes as he kind of told me where he'd been and what he'd learned. And I think listening is huge. It's a simple thing, but not an easy thing.
But not an easy thing, that's right. So as we kind of continue in this conversation, I think about God's heart for the generations. Is there a word from his word or even, a passage or a story from within his word that you're just like, this always resonates with me as I think about the Lord's heart for the generations? Yeah,
that's good. So I think there's a couple things that come to mind for me right away. When I think about the scriptures, I would just think about different threads, and threads usually run throughout in different ways. But one of the threads, I think, is this idea of different generations with one faith in common. And so one of the strong metaphors, but also the literal piece of the faith really comes through the idea of family. And families are multi-generational, right? And so even from the beginning, you have grandfathers and then the fathers and mothers and then the children. You have intergenerational people following the one God in the Old Testament a long time ago. And so I think that's one of the themes is that part of what it means to be people of faith is that you're in the family of faith, and families are intergenerational.
That's great.
That's one thing that comes to mind. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or responses.
That's great. I love that. I love how the Lord, the Old Testament, same God, is always so intent in many of those passages about you share this word intentionally to the next generation, and remember your sons, and remember your daughter. It was so intentional in the things that he was saying. It's the makeup of the family. The one thing that came to mind, you're talking about threads, is like the announcement of truth that we are a holy nation, and nations develop and they sustain per generational continuance. And so he's saying you are a holy nation that will continue throughout. So that's the one thing that came to mind is the nation is made up of so many different parts and people groups.
And one of the things, and this is really common, especially in the Old Testament, where God tells the people continually, hey, tell your sons and daughters the stories of my faithfulness. Tell your sons and daughters the stories. And there's telling the stories is important, but then also the children have to have their own stories and experiences to tell their children. But sometimes there is a gap where, you know, you'll see basically when they don't tell those stories, or when generations kind of walk away from the Lord, it'll say they knew him not, right?
Yes, right.
And so there can be generational gaps in the story of faith, but I do think it's important to tell the stories throughout generations, but also to live the stories throughout generations.
That's great. There's another part to this that I think you would agree on, is that throughout the generations, there's different parts where people belong, or places that they hold. And I love to do like cultural studies of the church, the emerging church in Acts, in the New Testament church, and how sometimes in your brain you can read it with your age. So it's just how we are. You read it from your demographic. That's just how we read the word. But it's like, if we get a contextual understanding that like this new church, this emerging church, was built out of a lot of younger folks. They were Jesus' age, kind of 30s. But then the apostles and even some of the founders of the faith that were moving the church, they didn't stay 30. Like they were getting older and older. We were reading things from, 60 and 70 AD, like they were aging, and the church was still emerging and still forming amid persecution. And they were still giving to the church. They were still finding a place to serve in the body. And that's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing.
And it's interesting too, speaking of kind of the church as it emerged post Jesus, there's some recorded stories where entire households are saved, right? Which again, they're going to be multi-generational. You're going to have families living together, working together for the family, and telling the stories, but getting saved together. But again, you have the multi-generational experience as they're a family of faith together that crosses generations
I think it's an important thing for us to seek the Lord individually and corporately as it pertains to this, about like, Lord, as we age and throughout the generations here ourselves, and what place are you asking for us to hold and partner with you in, to serve the body, to equip the body for work, for good works, advancement of the kingdom? Because as we see, and even as I talked to Mary and some other folks before in previous weeks, there's a place for our youth, for our 20-somethings, our 30s and 40s, our 75 and up. There's places and for them to hold and serve and be a part of, but also a place where we can, uplift one another and say, I see you at 75 and up. I see you at 45. I see you at 18. You are a valuable part of this body. You're a valuable part of God's heart for the generations. And so as we kind of wind down here, I wanted to ask this question that I've asked a couple before, Jordan. That is, how would you encourage your generation to engage intergenerationally? And so encourage, but also what might we need? And I can say we, because we're close in age.
That's a tough question. The first part, I feel like one of the things I would say is, so there's a lot of people in our generation who are either have left the faith, or who are like have some serious questions and problems and things they're wrestling through. So there's kind of like this movement of like deconstructing faith, but lots of times deconstructing our faith just turns into like a bunch of pieces that we just kind of put down and then get thrown in like a junk drawer somewhere. Right. So I think one way I would encourage our generation is to say, I think starting to deconstruct our faith can be helpful at times, but make sure that we are reconstructing it in healthy ways with other people in community from different generations as well. And so, I want to say, I understand deconstruction, but let's not stop there. Let's reconstruct something that is true to who God is, but also to who we are and what our community needs from us as Jesus followers. So that's one way I would encourage our generation.
Yeah, that is awesome. I've had countless conversations with folks our age doing, I think, is some healthy, like you said, deconstruction of just trying to learn more about the Holy Spirit and how that fits into our life, and how is he still moving and working? I'm looking at the Word and trying to look at it from a cultural context of when it was written and how it connects to doing it for healthy reasons, because they believe in the Word, they believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, but then to have it built back up by those who are in different generations. As you said, their story and their testimony that the sky isn't falling.
Yeah.
We went through that phase where in my life, someone might say, where I was asking the Lord specific things about his word, about his truth, about his promises, about the Holy Spirit. And I had to do some deconstructing. And if you look at some of their lives while you're in community with them, I've gleaned from it in my own life to say like, oh my gosh, that person told me stories about their season of life when they were my age walking in the faith, and it's really helped shape me. So it's good. I appreciate you, man.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Guys, we are going to continue this conversation for a couple of more weeks, and we're just going to move up the generational ladder and continue to get some perspective. And again, the heart in this is to follow God's heart for the generations. And as a church body, we are multi-generational, probably more than anything. And so this is a really important conversation for us as we re-engage as the church. I pray that you guys have a great day wherever you are, wherever you're tuning in, and we will see you next time on Flourish.